Thank you. Be seated, please.
All right, Romans chapter 1. Continue to pray for Jim and Kate. I know they're very excited. Tiny little girl, 5 pounds 9 ounces. Jim did look exhausted. That must have been rough on him. But good to be back from a week in Las Vegas. It was hot. I like heat. If it was 90 degrees all year, I'd be fine. But 110, they say that's dry heat, but it was dry. It's weird because it just kept waking up. And then the time changed. So basically, 3 in the morning, I was wide awake and like, what do I do? So it was an interesting conference. It deals with computer programming that helps you track training, hiring, backgrounds, investigations, all this. But it started as an HR program through the government. So about 1,000 people there, I would guess 750 were human resource people, which view life totally different than everyone who is normal. I mean, they want to just complicate everything they can, and they worry about everything. And then you had about 250 of us that were in law enforcement who very much want to simplify things, get the job done and move on, and worry about feelings later. So they started every morning off with a cheer. It was great. The theme was the Ignite Conference, be the spark, be the spark that can change your organization. And so they'd be like, 1, 2, 3, be the spark. And you could pick the cops in the room out because we'd all were sitting there like, okay, it's 8 in the morning. First of all, I'm not the spark to anything at 8 o'clock in the morning. I definitely am not here to cheer, okay? And so it was quite the collision of different ideals, but it was good. Beth just spent the day. She went to the pool. She went on tours, and she actually saw Las Vegas. I just saw right by where I was at. But good to be back in what becomes normal life. So I did a little. I was curious about the town. It really is in the middle of nowhere if you've never been there, and 43 million people a year visit Las Vegas. I mean, it's just an unfathomable number when you think about it, and to see. You have what it's known for, the casinos and all that, but there's an actual city with people that live there with schools and churches and other industry and so forth. And it's essentially located. You're an hour and a half from the Hoover Dam. You can go to the Grand Canyon from there. So we put it down again as a time to go, as actually an actual vacation where I'm not in class during the day, because you can, and then you go up into Utah. Someone told me to drive through Death Valley. I didn't rent a vehicle, didn't have time to do that. And I'm like, isn't that just the desert? And they're like, no, it's really cool. And I talked to other people, and they said it is absolutely phenomenal to drive through Death Valley. It could be 70 degrees in Las Vegas, and you drive through Death Valley, it's 125. So just interesting. Then the mountain range, you just see, so much. Our nation has a very vast environment, creation of God that's just amazing to see in person instead of just through pictures. A couple weeks ago, when Kyle was in town, he and I were discussing preaching through books of the Bible. He asked me a question that I have often thought on, and that was, can you spend too much time preaching through a book of the Bible? And if anyone knows of the great English minister Martin Lloyd-Jones, he spent like 12 years preaching through the book of Romans. One caveat of that is it was a Friday night Bible study, so I see that as a little bit different than maybe Sunday morning. But Kyle and I both came to the agreement that yes, you can delve in too deep, too long into preaching through a book of the Bible in your church. And there's several reasons to that, but one of the main ones is the problem of it is the slow progression you're developing of the letter. So if we were to open the mail today and we had this letter from Paul, the book of Romans as we would call it, we would sit down and read it one continuous thing. You could be done in a very, couple hours today at the most. And so you had the start, the body, and the conclusion all as one complete thought. When you're preaching through it, though, we're stopping it and say, come back next week, and then we stop and come back next week, and we stop, come back next week. And so in a year, let's say we're in chapter 12, 13, where he gets very practical. We're a year removed from the introduction. We're a year removed from chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, or as we are right now in chapter 1, working into chapter 2, we're removed from what's in chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5, chapter 6. And so this morning, and periodically through Romans, I'm going to pause to kind of counteract where we're at. And what I mean by this is right now we are at where Paul's saying every one of us is a wretched sinner, mess, condemned. It's a great message to go home with every Sunday for the last 4 weeks. And we're not at chapter 3, 4, 5, 6, where he develops the grace of God and the gospel and so forth. We're still about a month or two from getting there. And so you miss out on what his intention and his purpose of his letter is. So today we're going to look at not so much the condemnation that he's spelling out for us in chapter 1, which he needs to do. We're going to jump a little bit ahead, though, and we're going to look at that God is gracious. So we don't leave just here week after week, because chapter 2 is the same thing. Chapter 3, all the way up to verse 20, is the same thing. It is universal condemnation. Why is Paul doing that? He's laying the foundation for how, one, the need of the gospel, but also the amazing aspect of the gospel, that despite what he says here in chapter 1, 2, and 3, the gospel comes in as grace in someone's life. Paul's progression goes from, I am excited to preach the gospel to everyone in his introduction, to everyone is a miserable wretch that rejects the truth about God and creates a false God to serve them. So we know his beginning. Then we looked in chapter 1, the end of it last week, and how what is the I don't want to use the word crime, the major sin, what mankind is doing here is the fact that they are replacing God with a God that they have created that serves them. The whole purpose of their God, and they can cover that with a cross, with Christianity, even use the name Jesus and so forth to create this, that God is here to serve me. And that's what Paul is condemning them for in chapter 1. And then he does give things, actions of men, of mankind, because of that. But his emphasis is that they have rejected the glory of God, and they've replaced it for the glory of man. We could even look in Genesis with the fall of Adam and Eve, the temptation that took place. We've seen it before, where Satan was actually tempting her with her own glory. You will be as wise as God. You will be like a God. You'll be able to see the things that God sees and so forth. What was he doing? He was appealing to her and her glory and her desire to exalt self. Same thing laid out here in chapter 1. If we were to read this letter in a continuous reading, we would balance out the progression. So let's do this. Let's begin in chapter 1, verse 18. Follow along as I read. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who by their unrighteousness suppress the truth. For what can be known about God is plain to them, because God has shown it to them. For his invisible attributes, namely his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly perceived ever since the creation of the world and the things that have been made, so they are without excuse. Life continues through grace. Through grace. We gave out these bookmarks when we came out here. I actually found a whole stack of them today. I went looking for them. And if I remember, it said, experience the grace life, our guiding principles. Number 1, to give Christ the preeminence. This is his church. He's the preeminent one. He receives all glory. Secondly, was to unlock the truths of God's word. Thirdly, to further the gospel of Jesus Christ. And then fourthly, to edify each others. All of those are an act, a means of God's grace. Grace is something, growing up, you probably heard it defined this way. Grace is, mercy is not getting what you deserve. Grace is getting something you do not deserve. And so we recognize that God has given us in salvation something we do not deserve. But I think we get so bogged down in this chaotic life and world we live in that in reality we forget to live by grace. Not only that, we forget to be gracious to others. I was listening to a podcast, and it's about Gen Z. Don't ask me the age group, but she's like 24. Grew up in Portland and Seattle. Anyone want to guess politics? Okay. And she is single, college degree, and she's into homesteading now and living off the grid and simplifying life, and she hopes to be married, and she can't wait till she has children, and she's going to homeschool. It's just like, okay, how did this happen? And come to find out there's actually a very strong movement of those in the libertarian side aspect of politics, even what we would call classic liberalism, mixed with conservatism, where they're like, and one of the things that's triggered this, believe it or not, was COVID. Because what happened in COVID? We all what? Stayed home, simplified our life, valued toilet paper. I saw a rush on toilet paper, wasn't sure, so I said, just buy a bundle for church and stick it in my office just so we got it. We don't want to run out here. The people, and now businesses are struggling, to get people to go back to work. They're like, but I can work from home. Why do I need to go back to the office? We actually realize how little we really need this big machine called America. Because we had to simplify. Not only that, families sat at home together, like parents and kids in the house at night. Many realize, I talked to one lady, she goes, I realize I'm not a homeschool mom. I want to kill my kids. I drank more wine than I ever did during that time. I'm like, okay, you're exaggerating, but well, I'm not going to argue. But many realize, you know what, I do want to train my kids. Many ladies said, I don't want to go back in the workforce if I got to be in the office 50, 60, 70 hours a week. And so there's this unique trend that's taking place that they're saying, wait a minute, the government is supposed to protect us, and they lost confidence in the government because what they were putting out, then they were changing. And I remember the whole big argument of Vectimin, or don't ask me to spell it or pronounce it. And my doctor up on the North End, I remember I brought it up to him, and afterwards, he goes, let me show you something. And he showed me a letter from the St. Clair County Health Department and the state saying, we're going to pull your license if you don't stop doing this. And he says, no one tells me how to treat my patients. You're the biggest one saying, don't get between the doctor and the patients. And he wouldn't do it. You know what he's doing? Him and his partner were doing Avectimin. Why were they doing it? His partner's from India. You know what India treated with? Avectimin. And they had massive success with it. So they went out and he bought a ton of it before it was gone. Well, the CDC is saying now CDC has studies out said it's one of the most important things they recommend. So there's this loss of confidence that's taken place. This, I can be home and survive. And the lady they were interviewing, she actually made an interesting statement. She goes, you know, I feel like one of the biggest pushes to get both parents working was just to get more tax dollars, which is actually a reality. The government, it's in their studies in that. We can increase revenue if we can get both parents working. So there's this huge return to what? The basics. Now, listening to her, she's making her own soap and all this. I'm like, oh, I would, all her food, and I'm like, I would die at your house. They went on this whole thing of processed food. And listen, 100% I agree with them. They are right. Life expectancy of a male in America is 73. That's 19 years from now. I'm just going to be like my grandma with her non-filter cigarettes and say, I ain't changing. I'm going to eat my processed food. But it's interesting to listen to this girl speak, this lady speak, how her value system was changed through what we would call a trial, a difficult time, when she started to realize the basics of life are really there and we don't need all these other things. And this, not a believer, never did, she might have mentioned God, recognizing God, but never went into faith or anything like that. The guy interviewed her, did ask her, he said, what kind of man are you looking for? Well, they would have to, have my belief against processed foods, and I'm like, oh, wow. I mean, she has narrowed this down. There might be one dude alive out there. Hope we can find him for her, because she sounds like an amazing lady. But this whole aspect of this trial, COVID, has look at us as a church. How many churches said, did we need all this? We can still have church with all the big, flash in the pan stuff. We've seen it in my line of work, There's a lot of stuff we were doing and busyness we're doing, and we're actually struggling right now to get some productivity going back. But it was like, you know what? The world didn't burn down and fall apart because we backed off proactive policing. When we come to the Christian life, we recognize that it is not a smooth trajectory upward, but it is actually a life that has difficulties and struggles in it. And as it does, the reality comes to set in how important grace is in our life. Just want God's grace. My favorite hymn, I don't know if it's in our new songbook. I guess I haven't even paid attention. Grace greater than all my sins. It is just my favorite hymn. It's not a confession. It's a reality. And here in Romans 1, I've been preaching we're condemned. We're horrible wretches. Chapter 2 is going to hit the religious person who doesn't think they're condemned, in this case the Jew, but it could apply to us. Chapter 3, then he's going to sum it all up with all have sinned. Now let me tell you how amazing the gospel is in your life. Because though he has described us in chapters 1, 2, and the first half of chapter 3 as these wretches, these horrible sinners, selfish people, he says that is who you are, but that is not who you have to be, because Christ has come and his gospel and grace has come with him. Recently, on the plane coming back, I was able to listen to some podcasts, and I listened to one, and Jordan Peterson was in it. He's an interesting character. Very wise intellectual psychologist. Not sure he's a believer yet, though he's recognizing the importance of Christianity. It's just many of you will know who he is. But he made this comment. He got talking about grandparents and grandkids. So it kind of caught my interest. And he talked about studies have shown how important interaction with grandparents and grandchildren are. And the greatest benefit is for the grandparent. To the point that literally studies have shown it prolongs life in an elderly person to be around their grandchild. I'm not sure I agree with that right now because I'm ready to die. When I have 5, 4, 2, and 1 on the way, all girls, I'm thinking, man. I'm like near-death experiences. Remember the camp out? Delaney walks up and just bites me on the leg and goes, owie? I'm like, yeah, you just did it. Kennedy was awesome in her soccer game yesterday, scored 2 goals in her own goal. She was the goalie. As the ball was coming, she'd run out, turn around, get the ball, and kick it into her goal. And I'm like, you can't yell at the kids. You got to affirm them and love them. And you want to just say, what? Yank her out, man. She's like the most valuable player for the other team. I scored. I'm like, do I tell her reality or do I be like, yeah, good job? So I'm like, well, you scored for the wrong team. I was going to tell her. You got to figure it out at some point. Can't wait till she's 18, realizing she messed up, that she's in counseling because we withheld the truth from her. But the study showed how the importance, and there were several factors, but think of what they brought is, the reality is when you start hitting your 50s and 60s, you're going through a major change. Your kids are growing up, they're out of the house, everyone looks for this time when it's just the two of you, and there is some benefit to that, but in reality, you're almost lost at this point. You're probably at your higher level of your potential at work. You've been there a while. You've moved up in rank and positions and different things like that, and you're hitting the success. If you're like me, I'm thinking I could have used this paycheck when I had the kids at home, now that they're gone. And you're at that point, but there's a huge emptiness that hits human beings. This is life. This is reality. In fact, that's where he mentioned the life expectancy of a man in America is 73. Bingo, 54 in November. 19 years. Whoa, way to discourage me. Good thing I'm 30,000 feet up in a plane or it'd be pointless. I mean, it's just like, really 19 years? That just seems like, goes by like that. And the way he presented it, though, caused me to think about a definition of grace. Grace is not the removal of struggles and difficulties in your life. Grace is the light of God and Christ and the gospel coming into your life during those times. And that's what grandchildren do to someone in their older years. Ailments, physical, mental struggles, evaluating life, purpose of life, all those things take place in your 50s, 60s, and 70s. But then once a week or every so often, all of a sudden this bundle of joy comes in the house called a grandchild. And they said the effect that has on the human mind is amazing. Dean and Lori, they're supposed to be grandparents, okay? Dean looks like a grandpa. Lori, you're too young. Dean lost his hair, but that might have been 6 kids that did that though too. You get this grandchild. And you know, people don't, the joke is grandparents never discipline a grandchild. There is truth to that, but there's also wisdom to that, because we wish maybe I could go back and be maybe less hard on my child than I was and so forth. But you now see this is my heritage. This is my life. I'm going to pass off the scene, and this is what's going to continue. This is going to be the memory of me. Will not be through billboards. I'm not going to be in history books. It's going to be my grandchildren, my offspring, and their grandchildren speaking about me. And that and it has a powerful effect. And yes, they also showed there is a great effect on the grandchild to have interaction with the grandparent. There's a benefit, but there's a huge benefit, literally, that it prolongs someone's life to have grandchildren with them. And I saw that as a picture of grace. Grace does not take away struggles in life, but it's this glorious happiness and joy that God gives us through the trials. If you have your Bible, just turn there if you want quickly. 2 Corinthians 12, verse 9. Paul talks about this. But he said to me, talking about his thorn in the flesh, my grace is sufficient for you. For my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Paul's there talking about grace. Grace did not remove. Grace just came in and became sufficiency. It became this unexpected joy and comfort and power and means of God's interaction in our lives. What an amazing definition of grace. The human mind is an interesting study. I like to study it and how it thinks and how it functions. We can adapt to new normals all the time, but we always create a coping mechanism. So take my work. I guess I should have thought about it, but I never realized just how I'm going to chase down bad guys, because that's what they highlight on TV, right? Then you find out much of your day is spent dealing with human tragedy. The number one call we will take over the year, health and safety. In other words, someone's in distress, mental, whatever, check on them, health and safety. Health and safety. And you get there and you see these things and you just see them over and over and over and over again. I've shared before, there's a lot of scenes I've been on. For some reason, when people hang themselves, that one really bothers me. I don't know why than other scenes, but you're sitting there and you're photographing, you're looking at their house. This is their whole life and it's done. Because you're in there waiting for the ME, you go into their office and there's their plaques and their certificates and awards at work and accomplishments. You're like, none of it does. Now this person is dead on the kitchen floor. Just the cruelty of death. And so the human mind has to do something, has to process this. Every one of you do this with things in your life. You are processing, your mind has to process everything it sees and hears. You have to do something with it. Okay? Men process it in silence. We contemplate it. We sit there. If you've ever seen the difference between men and women's brain, it's very true. We have this nothing box. We can sit there where you think about absolutely nothing. We're trying to figure out how to do it. Ladies will vocalize it. They want to discuss it. They want their feelings. They want you to listen. Men are like, I just want to shut down. I'm good. Well, what are you thinking? Nothing. We need to talk. No, we don't. And they've actually proven that's the worst thing you can do to him is make him talk sometimes. Just let him. We process it in a moment of silence. We organize it. Now we're ready to address it. And so there's sometimes this delay, but the human mind has to cope with this process. You want to know how cops cope with that process mostly? We joke about it. If you sat in a room with a bunch of cops, you would sit there and be like, you guys are kind of callous. No, it's a coping mechanism. Have to process all these things I've seen. How do I process it? What do I do with this information? Where do I put it? They're finally in the last, they say 10 years, I think it's the last 5, and I think even it's now starting to pick up steam, understanding mental wellness in law enforcement and first responders and stuff. And the problem is nobody still will go and talk to anyone, because if you talk to someone and say the wrong thing, they're going to say, yeah, they probably shouldn't be out there on the street today. Now you've lost your health care, your pension, and everything. So still trying to get them to talk. So they cope with it. 90% cope with it through joking. The second thing they'll do is when they do get a moment to be out of work as a group, they'll drink heavily. They'll have, it's funny, it's hilarious. I'm not talking fighting brawls, I'm talking like, but they just unwind. It's just like this, whew. What are they doing? They're processing. They're trying to think, I have a new normal in my life that I wasn't expecting to deal with. And now my mind has to cope with this. So they make fun of it. The average human will see about 1 to 2 tragedies in their life. The average law enforcement officer will see over 1,000. So you have to process this. You say, what does this have to do with God's grace? The Christian life is not a clean experience. Grace is the mechanism God gives us to help us process through that. God is gracious. God's grace. God's grace. Years ago, there was a pastor, Jack Scott. He ended up going to prison for 12 years for an inappropriate relationship with a 16-year-old because he brought her to Michigan, so he crossed a state line because there wasn't a law in Indiana, actually, that he violated. He ended up going to, he's out now. He actually lives in Michigan. Is anyone concerned about his spiritual well-being? I mean, if he came to he's on the west side of the state, but if he walked into our church, how would we address that? Well, hopefully through grace. Through grace. You see, Paul here is laying out this foundation, but Paul's not going to say here, because when we get to chapter 3, the end, and we hit 4, 5, 6, 7, it's all going to be about God's grace working in our Christian life. The power of God's grace. As things become more out of control, the human mind will resort to more primitive, simpler resources that allow one to fight through what we often call the fight or flight mentality. That's what happened with COVID. As struggles and resources and different things, people became more, let's go back to the basics. I think you see this in Christianity right now. Let's go back to the basics. We're seeing this in our nation. People like to return to a more primitive time, and when they do, in America, you're going to find Christianity as a major voice in the culture. I think that's part of the awareness. I don't like to call it an awakening. The awareness people are having about the importance of God in our society. There's a return to that. I didn't say a return as far as a revival in the gospel, though I'll tell you what, that's a means of grace for the gospel. So it is a good thing. But they're returning to this more simpler time, this simpler understanding where God is gracious and God is good. And in that process, we start to see that, yes, we are wretched. Yes, we are sinners. Yes, we are under God's condemnation. Yes, we deserve that. But God did not leave us here because God is a gracious God. As confusion and chaos develop, a return to a simpler time is sought. And in America, that simpler time includes Christianity. People draw to this fight or flight mechanism. How we do that fight or flight, and everyone does it, it should be different for the Christian because we ought to be able to return, we ought to go to the source of the greatest fight, the source of the greatest power, which is the grace of God. We had a coworker, they had their first child here about a month ago. They both work for us. They're both cops. And we had some overtime, and I saw him signing up. I said, whoa. You got a baby due that time. He goes, no sense both of us sitting at home. I've spoken like a guy who doesn't have a kid yet. Okay. Also has season tickets to the Lions game every year. Family does. Opening day, opening game. Going to have a tailgate, invited guys from work. Hey, we're going to meet here. We got this girl going. I'm like, hey, because, dude, why should we both sit there? It's a little kid. Needless to say, they had the child, and a few days later, he goes, yeah, I'm not going to make it to the Lions game. We all just kind of laughed. And yeah, I can't work all that overtime. We just started to laugh with that. We started to be like, okay, bud, now reality is setting in. And you had and you love this child. But there's times you're like, I just want to sleep. He comes to work now, and you can just look at him like, long night. I said, what happened to no sense both of us being up at the same time? I thought that was the model. So she really tries to let me sleep, but something you just can't. This kid won't stop talking, won't stop crying, and I think it has colic. It makes it even worse. But then you have that moment when you're holding that child. You look at the picture of Jim holding their little girl. So peaceful. Should check to see how they're doing today. That little, what is it? That's a picture of like grace. It doesn't take away the reality. You're still tired. You're still exhausted, but you hold this innocent infant in your arms, and you start to realize what a joy and blessing God has given me. That is a grace. That we're always looking for this big outpouring of God's grace. We're looking for something larger than life. No, it's the simple little aspects of God giving grace. I'll get home today. We'll go in the house. Tessa will want to watch TV. Matthew will tell her to take a nap. I'll go through that whole rigmarole. She'll get up from her nap, and then here comes the other two, and chaos erupts. It just does. It's like 3 hours of just chaos when all three are there. I mean, there's nonstop go, 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 go. I mean, it doesn't end. And we're exhausted, and we're tired, and they leave, and we got to pick everything up. And I'm like, man, I just need a night, maybe 2 days where they don't come over. You know what I do about that second day? Hey, what are you guys doing? I'm driving to Marysville. I'll stop in and see the girls. Because there's that joy that comes with it. I'm trying to give you this understanding of grace. It's just this picture of just this simple little things that God does. His grace is sufficient. It strengthens us. It comforts us. The strength of the gospel is seen through, or though, in this condemnation of Romans. So why does Paul spend his time just seems like he's just dumping on how horrible humans are? Because they won't grasp the power and the strength of the gospel if you don't understand where you came from. Paul's setting the groundwork for the gospel. Romans does not end in chapter 3, verse 10. This is just the introduction. God is gracious to his people. God is a God of grace. Undeserved favor. He's just gracious. Undeserved favor. It's undeserved, but he gives it anyways. And that grace comes into our lives through many different sources. Here we'll be looking specifically at the gospel, but after the gospel, that's why we chose our name, we still live a life of grace. Undeserved favor, undeserved blessings, little joys in the middle of these things. We called the girls in Las Vegas, and we're FaceTiming them. And FaceTime, what an amazing thing. And I'm looking at them, and we're talking, and how's it going? Where are you at, Papa? I'm in Las Vegas. Can I come see you? No, it's far away. Why didn't you take me? Oh, yeah. Really? I mean, they're not doing that on purpose. I don't think they're that smart yet, okay? But it's just like that, well, because Pop-Up's doing work, and then, is Mimi doing work too? No, actually, Mimi's just enjoying walking around seeing things. Huh. Can I come see you? No, I already told you you can't. Man, they just this idea, but that little 20-minute phone call, just like, yep, that was awesome. What is that? That's a definition, experience of grace. God does the same thing. And you never know, Christian, when you are the means that God is going to use to be grace in someone else's life. Just that little element of joy and kindness and love and patience and humility that you provide in someone's life. Grace doesn't remove the realities and the struggles and the difficulties of life. but it is a sufficient means of our amazing God in our lives, no matter the situation. God's grace. Let's pray. Father, we thank you for Romans, and as we are working through Romans, we ask that we would not lose sight of your grace and your power and your blessing in our life. We ask that you would help us to see just how amazing the gospel is and what it has done for us. Then help us to live according to the gospel, to be the gospel with others.